One choice, one moment, one love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The strange thing about destiny is that it rarely knocks politely. Rain slid down the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marlowe House, like silver threads melting through Manhattan light, while Alara Quinn balanced 3 plates on one arm and silently counted the seconds left in her shift. 11:42 p.m. 28 more minutes until she could finally take off the stiff black heels pinching her feet and go home to her tiny Brooklyn apartment with the radiator that sounded like it was fighting for its life every winter night. The restaurant glowed with old money elegance. Crystal glasses, dark walnut walls, jazz soft enough to make rich people feel intelligent. And in the center booth beneath a gold chandelier sat the one man every server had been warned not to approach unless absolutely necessary. Callum Vale, billionaire, investor, human version of a closed vault. Even from across the dining room, he looked untouchable. Sharp charcoal suit, steel watch catching the amber light, one hand resting near a glass of bourbon that probably cost more than Alara's monthly electric bill. He had arrived with 2 executives and an exhaustion so heavy it seemed to follow him like weather. Table 12 needs sparkling, her manager whispered sharply while adjusting his tie for the 3rd time in 60 seconds. And smile like your rent depends on it. It literally does, Alara muttered. She grabbed the chilled bottle and crossed the room carefully while conversations floated around her in polished fragments about hedge funds, private flights, and people pretending to enjoy truffle foam. Then it happened. A man in a navy blazer stepped backward without looking just as Alara reached Callum's table. Her shoulder clipped his arm. The bottle slipped. Ice water splashed across the front of the man's expensive jacket. Silence cracked across the booth area. The man looked down in horror. Are you kidding me? He snapped loudly enough for nearby tables to turn. Alara froze. I'm so sorry, sir. Do you know how much this jacket costs? Probably enough to buy a small island. She replied before her brain could stop her mouth. A couple at the next table nearly choked trying not to laugh. The man's face darkened. You think that's funny? No, sir. Then maybe act like a professional instead of some clumsy little girl playing waitress. Alara felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she kept her voice calm. I said I'm sorry. The manager rushed over instantly, already panicking. Mr. Kensington, we deeply apologize. Alara, go to the back. Now. She nodded once. Humiliation settled cold beneath her ribs. Another rich man. Another reminder that in places like this, people only noticed waitresses when something went wrong. She turned to leave. Then a voice cut through the room. Low, calm, precise. She is with me. Every sound in the restaurant disappeared. Even the jazz seemed to stop breathing. Alara blinked and slowly turned around. Callum Vale had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. The billionaire sat motionless in the booth, eyes fixed on the furious customer beside her. Excuse me? The man asked. Callum lifted his bourbon glass slightly. You heard me. Callum, I didn't realize, then realize it now. The man's entire posture changed. Like someone had unplugged his confidence from the wall. I wasn't aware she was part of your party. Alara stared at Callum in complete confusion. She had never seen this man before in her life. Not once. I'm not, she started quietly. But Callum stood before she could finish. Tall, controlled, the kind of presence that made entire rooms reorganize themselves around him. He pulled out the empty seat beside his own booth. Sit down, he said to her. Sir, I actually have tables waiting. Sit. Not harsh, not demanding, just certain. The manager looked seconds away from cardiac arrest. Alara hesitated, then slowly sat. Because somehow saying no felt impossible under the weight of those gray eyes studying her like he recognized something no one else could see. Mr. Kensington cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, I'll leave you both to your evening. He disappeared almost immediately. Cowardice moved fast in designer shoes. Alara leaned closer to Callum once the room's whispers resumed. Okay, she whispered. Either you just saved my job, or you're completely insane. To her shock, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Almost a smile. Possibly both. She glanced around nervously. Half the restaurant was pretending not to stare at them. Why did you say I was with you? Callum looked at her for a long moment before answering. The city lights reflected softly in his glass. Rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. Because, he said quietly, the moment you walked into this room tonight, he paused. Something unreadable crossed his face. Something strangely human beneath all the billionaire armor. I had the strongest feeling I already knew you. Alara Quinn had spent 27 years learning that rich men usually came in two versions. Loud ones who wanted attention and quiet ones who wanted control. Callum Vale somehow managed to be both without saying more than 10 words at a time. The restaurant slowly returned to life around them, but the energy had changed. Waiters moved more carefully. Conversations lowered into whispers. Every person in the room kept stealing glances toward the billionaire sitting beside a waitress who still smelled faintly like lemon sanitizer and rainwater. Alara stared at the untouched breadbasket between them before finally speaking. So which part of this is happening exactly? Callum leaned back slightly. Dinner. No. Dinner usually involves people knowing each other. That is technically optional. She blinked once. You are either the weirdest billionaire in New York or you hit your head very hard before arriving here tonight. Another almost smile appeared for half a second. Small. Dangerous. Like his face was not used to it. A server approached nervously with a fresh bourbon. Callum shook his head. Bring her whatever she wants instead. Alara looked up immediately. Coffee. The server hesitated. At midnight. That is when coffee becomes emotional support. For the first time all evening, Callum let out an actual quiet laugh. It was low and brief, but real enough that two executives at a nearby table looked over in visible confusion. Apparently, the man almost never laughed in public. Alara folded her arms. Okay, now I definitely need answers because people are reacting like Bigfoot just started tap dancing. Do you always talk this much? Callum asked. Only when mysterious billionaires kidnap me emotionally. Her coffee arrived in a white porcelain cup worth more than her weekly grocery budget. She wrapped both hands around it while Callum studied her with that same strange focus that made her feel like he was trying to solve a memory instead of looking at a person. You work every Thursday night? He asked. Usually. How long? At Marlowe House? 2 years. And before that? Different restaurants. Different uniforms. Different managers pretending employees are family right before cutting hours. Callum nodded once, as if filing away every detail. Outside, rain painted the streets in blurred gold reflections while yellow taxis crawled through Manhattan traffic below the windows. The city looked softer from up here. Less cruel. Alara took a careful sip of coffee. So what do you do when you are not terrifying hedge fund managers? Mostly meetings. That sounds depressing. It is. You know, most billionaires try harder to pretend they enjoy life. Most billionaires are lying. That answer landed heavier than she expected. For a second, the exhaustion behind his eyes became visible again. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind people carried when too many years passed without silence or trust. Alara softened slightly without meaning to. You always this cheerful? Only on special occasions. And tonight is special because... Callum looked directly at her. I am still deciding. The air shifted again. Not romantic exactly. Not yet. Just strange enough to make her heartbeat stumble for reasons she did not appreciate. She quickly looked away and grabbed a breadstick. Well, congratulations, she muttered. You officially made dinner uncomfortable. You started it. I spilled water on a millionaire. Close. Billionaire. Wow. Thank you. That correction healed my financial anxiety immediately. Another laugh. Slightly longer this time. Then silence settled between them, surprisingly easy. Piano music drifted through the restaurant, while lightning flashed faintly beyond the skyline. Alara glanced toward his left wrist and noticed the watch beneath his cuff. Old silver. Scratched edges. Not flashy like the watches wealthy men usually wore to announce their existence to strangers. Something about it felt personal. Familiar somehow. That is a beautiful watch, she said quietly. Callum instinctively touched it. It belonged to my brother. The warmth in his expression vanished almost instantly afterward. Alara immediately regretted asking. Sorry, you do not need to apologize. People only use that voice when they absolutely do. His eyes lifted toward hers again. Calm. Careful. My brother disappeared 11 years ago. The restaurant noise suddenly felt farther away. Alara lowered her cup slowly. That is horrible. Callum did not answer right away. He simply watched the rain slide down the windows. He used to say something strange whenever our father got angry during business meetings, he said eventually. Something ridiculous, honestly. Like what? A faint breath escaped him. Almost nostalgia. He used to say, rich men collect watches because they cannot control time. Alara froze with the coffee halfway to her lips. Then she laughed softly under her breath, without thinking. That sounds exactly like my dad. Callum turned toward her immediately. Completely still. The room around them disappeared again. What did you say? Alara shrugged lightly, unaware of the sudden tension in his face. Nothing. My father used to say weird stuff like that when I was little. Callum stared at her as thunder rolled quietly over Manhattan. And for the first time that night, the billionaire looked genuinely shaken. Some memories do not appear like photographs. They arrive like echoes. Callum Vale barely remembered leaving the restaurant that night. One moment Alara Quinn was sitting across from him holding a coffee cup with both hands while thunder rolled outside the windows, and next he was stepping into the back of a black town car with Manhattan rain streaking across the glass beside him. His driver glanced into the mirror once. Home, sir. Callum loosened his tie slightly. No office. Yes. The car moved through wet midnight traffic while New York glowed around him in blurred rivers of red brake lights and gold reflections. Normally, he used the silence of these rides to prepare for meetings, acquisitions, interviews, problems worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Tonight, all he could hear was her voice. Rich men collect watches because they cannot control time. The exact sentence his brother Julian used to repeat whenever their father became unbearable. Same rhythm. Same sarcasm. Even the same half-amused tone. Callum stared down at the old silver watch on his wrist. 11 years ago, Julian disappeared without explanation 3 days before Christmas. Nobody. No goodbye. Just silence that hollowed out the Vale family from the inside. Their father buried himself in work until stress finally destroyed his heart. Their mother disappeared into charity galas and European retreats where no one asked personal questions. And Callum built an empire because building things hurt less than grieving people. But tonight something cracked open. One waitress with tired eyes and cheap shoes had casually spoken a sentence buried inside his childhood. Sir, the driver asked carefully, you are squeezing your hand. Callum looked down. His fingers were clenched around the watch so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. Sorry. 20 minutes later, he stepped into Vale Capital headquarters overlooking Park Avenue. The entire 43rd floor was dark except for emergency lighting and the skyline beyond the windows. Quiet. Controlled. Empty. Just the way he preferred it. Usually, he walked directly into his private office and pressed a button near his desk. Evelyn. A sleepy voice answered through the intercom. It is 12:30 in the morning. I know. Someone. Better be dying. I need information. A long sigh. Of course you do. Evelyn Hart had been Callum's executive assistant for 9 years, and the only human alive who spoke to him like an annoyed older sister instead of a billionaire. 10 minutes later, she appeared in his office wearing sneakers, glasses, and the expression of a woman reconsidering every career decision she had ever made. This had better be illegal levels of important. Callum handed her a folded receipt from Marlowe House with Alara's employee ID written near the bottom. Find out everything you can about her. Evelyn stared at the paper, then at him, then back at the paper. You dragged me into Manhattan after midnight because you met a waitress? Evelyn. Oh my God. She dropped dramatically into the chair across from his desk. You are in love. I spoke to her for 45 minutes. That is how rich men fall in love. You people do not have hobbies. Callum ignored that. Her father used a phrase my brother used to say. Evelyn's teasing expression softened immediately. Silence filled the office for a moment. That is not possible, she said quietly. I know. Then why are you looking at me like the universe just sent you a text message? He walked toward the windows overlooking the sleeping city. Because when she said it, it did not feel impossible. Evelyn studied him carefully. What exactly are you hoping to find? Callum did not answer right away. Somewhere far below, a siren echoed through Manhattan streets slick with rain. I do not know, he admitted finally. Meanwhile, across the East River in Brooklyn, Alara stood barefoot in her apartment kitchen eating cereal directly from the box while her roommate Sophia stared at her in complete disbelief. "Let me understand this correctly," Sophia said slowly. "You accidentally assaulted a millionaire with sparkling water. Technically, hydration is not assault. Then the most emotionally unavailable billionaire in America claimed you in front of half of Manhattan?" Alara pointed a spoon at her. "That sounds much weirder when you say it out loud." "Because it is weird." Alara laughed softly despite herself and opened the tiny freezer that always smelled faintly like frozen waffles and bad decisions. "Honestly, I think the guy is just lonely. Lonely men buy motorcycles. They do not stare into your soul during dessert." Alara rolled her eyes, but something about that sentence unsettled her. Because Sophia was right about one thing. There had been a moment back at the restaurant where Callum looked at her less like a stranger and more like someone standing in the middle of a memory he could not fully reach. She walked into her bedroom and dropped her purse onto the bed. A small silver object slipped out and landed softly on the floor. Alara bent down and picked it up. An old Swiss watch. Worn edges. Cracked leather strap. The only thing her father left behind after he died 6 years earlier. She rubbed her thumb across the scratched glass thoughtfully. Then her phone buzzed unexpectedly on the nightstand. Unknown number. One message. One sentence. "I think we need to talk again." She stared at the screen while rain continued tapping softly against the Brooklyn windows. By the next afternoon, Manhattan had already turned last night into gossip. 2 women in expensive coats whispered Callum Vale's name near the hostess stand while Alara tied her apron in the employee hallway pretending not to notice. Apparently the internet had questions. Why had one of the richest men in America spent nearly an hour talking to a waitress nobody knew? Why had he left the restaurant smiling? Most importantly, who was the blonde woman sitting beside him? Alara wanted to personally apologize to every journalist forced to build a career around rich people, because honestly their lives looked exhausting. "You are famous now," Sophia texted her that morning along with 3 screenshots from celebrity blogs. "One article called you Mystery Manhattan Girl." Alara replied with a single message. "I hate everyone." She was carrying a tray of iced tea toward table 6 when her phone buzzed again in her apron pocket. Unknown number. Same as last night. She stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering. "If this turns out to be a kidnapping situation, I want it officially documented that I knew better." A quiet breath of amusement answered first. "You always answer the phone like that?" "Callum." For some reason, hearing his voice during daylight hours felt even stranger. More real somehow. "Depends," she said carefully. "Are you always this mysterious, or was yesterday a seasonal thing?" "I need a favor." "That sounds expensive already." "Dinner tonight." Alara nearly laughed. "You called a waitress during lunch rush to ask her to dinner?" "No," a pause. "I called because I need someone intelligent who does not care about my money." She stopped walking. Around her, dishes clinked and espresso machines hissed while New York continued moving at its usual impatient speed. "That might be the weirdest compliment I have ever received." "Will you come?" "You still have not explained why." "Because there is a charity gala tonight, and every woman I know treats conversations like hostage negotiations." Alara smiled despite herself. "And you think I would not? You told me billionaires look sleep-deprived 30 minutes after meeting me." "Fair point." Another pause settled between them. Softer this time. "I will pay you for the evening," he added. Immediately her expression changed. "No, Alara. No," the sharpness surprised even her. She lowered her voice and stepped near the kitchen doors. "If you want company, ask me honestly. But do not offer me money like I am some problem you are outsourcing." Silence. Heavy enough that she wondered if he had hung up. Then finally, "Quieter now," he said. "You are right." Something about the sincerity in those 3 words disarmed her more than charm ever could. Most powerful men defended themselves when corrected. Callum simply absorbed it. "So," he continued carefully, "would you come because I am asking?" Alara looked out through the restaurant windows where gray clouds drifted above Manhattan skyscrapers. Somewhere in that giant city was a billionaire she barely knew who somehow made her feel both suspicious and strangely safe at the same time. Which honestly seemed medically irresponsible. What exactly would I be walking into? A room full of wealthy people pretending not to hate each other. Wow, you really know how to romance a woman. She heard him exhale another soft laugh through the phone. "Please." That word changed everything. No ego. No command. Just honesty. Alara rubbed her forehead dramatically. "I cannot believe I am saying yes to this." 6 o'clock. A car will pick you up. Absolutely not. What now? No mysterious billionaire cars outside my apartment building. My neighbors already think I joined a cult because I own 2 matching coats. Fine. Fine. You are difficult. You are rich. God gives everyone challenges. She hung up before he could answer and immediately regretted smiling afterward. By 6:15 that evening, Alara stood outside the entrance of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, trying very hard not to panic. Rainwater shimmered across the sidewalks, while black luxury cars lined the curb like polished dominoes. Men in tailored tuxedos and women covered in diamonds floated through the revolving doors carrying million-dollar confidence and tiny handbags that looked deeply impractical. Alara stared down at herself. Simple black dress borrowed from Sophia. Silver earrings from a department store clearance rack. Hair pinned up with exactly 3 bobby pins and pure determination. You look gorgeous, Sophia had told her before she left. Like someone who accidentally ruins powerful men emotionally. The lobby doors opened before Alara could lose her nerve. And there he was. Callum Vale stood near the marble staircase in a midnight blue tuxedo speaking with 2 investors until his eyes lifted toward her. Then he stopped talking completely. The entire lobby seemed to blur around him for one suspended second. Alara walked toward him slowly. You are staring, she whispered when she reached him. I know. It is becoming a habit. You look beautiful. The honesty in his voice landed harder than flirtation. Her cheeks warmed slightly before she could stop them. Careful, she muttered. That almost sounded sincere. It was. Before she could answer, an older socialite swept past them wearing enough diamonds to legally qualify as a chandelier. The woman glanced at Alara once, then twice. Callum, she said smoothly. You did not mention you were bringing someone. Alara instantly recognized the tone. Wealthy women had perfected polite cruelty into an art form. But before the awkwardness could grow, Callum stepped slightly closer beside her. Not touching, just there. Solid. Intentional. That is because, he said calmly, never taking his eyes off Alara. Some things are worth surprising people with. Wealthy people had a specific way of pretending to be relaxed. They held champagne glasses too carefully, smiled too slowly, laughed half a second too late. Alara noticed all of it within 10 minutes of entering the ballroom at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of guests dressed like magazine covers, while a string quartet played near the marble staircase. Everywhere she looked, there were diamonds, polished tuxedos, and conversations about private islands spoken with the emotional intensity of weather reports. Alara leaned slightly toward Callum as they crossed the ballroom together. I feel like everyone here owns at least 1 yacht and 0 hobbies. That is accurate, he said calmly. One man in that corner owns 3 yachts. She glanced toward an older man drinking champagne near the bar. That feels greedy. He is divorced. Emotional support yachts. Callum looked down briefly, hiding another smile. The strange thing was how natural this already felt. As if somewhere between midnight coffee and awkward honesty, they had skipped the exhausting stage where 2 people pretend to be impressive. Several executives approached Callum immediately the moment they entered the center of the room. Men with silver hair and billion-dollar handshakes. Women in couture gowns with perfectly practiced smiles. Alara expected Callum to drift away from her into his world, but he did the opposite. He stayed beside her through every introduction. This is Alara Quinn, he said each time with quiet certainty. Never waitress. Never friend. Just her name. And somehow that mattered. Callum, one investor laughed during introductions. You have officially become mysterious. I was already mysterious, Callum replied dryly. Now you are mysterious with a beautiful woman beside you. Alara nearly inhaled, sparkling water into her lungs. She recovered with dignity that deserved recognition from the federal government. You okay? Callum asked quietly once the group moved on. I think rich people compliment each other like they are negotiating peace treaties. Before he could answer, a glamorous brunette woman approached in a gold designer gown sharp enough to cut glass. Tall, elegant, the kind of woman who probably never spilled coffee on herself in moving vehicles. Callum, she said smoothly, kissing the air beside his cheek. You disappeared from Zurich without calling. Hello, Vivian. Her eyes shifted toward Alara slowly. Assessing, measuring, dismissing. And who is this? Alara Quinn. Vivian smiled politely. The kind of smile women invented specifically for social warfare. How lovely. Alara smiled back, just as sweetly. Thank you. Your dress looks expensive. A tiny pause. It is custom. That explains why it looks nervous. Callum turned away immediately, shoulders tightening with suppressed laughter. Vivian blinked. Excuse me. Nothing. Alara said innocently. I just think confidence wears better than sequins. Two nearby investors nearly choked on their drinks. Vivian's expression froze completely before she recovered with practiced elegance. Callum, darling, your guest is amusing. Yes, he said calmly while looking directly at Alara. She usually is. The warmth in his voice hit harder than the compliment itself. Vivian noticed it too. That made Alara uncomfortable in ways she could not explain. A while later, Callum was pulled toward a stage area for a scheduled donor speech, while Alara escaped toward the dessert table in search of emotional stability disguised as chocolate. She reached for a tiny pastry at the exact same moment as an elderly man beside her. You take it, he offered kindly. At my age, joy requires less sugar. Alara laughed softly. That might be the smartest sentence spoken tonight. You are the young woman accompanying Callum Vale. Apparently. Interesting man. You say that like there is a warning label attached. The older man smiled into his whiskey. Callum built walls around himself years ago. Most people stopped trying to climb them. Alara glanced across the ballroom toward the stage where Callum stood adjusting his cufflinks under golden light. Powerful. Composed. Alone somehow, even surrounded by hundreds of people. Maybe, she said quietly, some walls are actually doors nobody knocked on correctly. The older man studied her with visible surprise before nodding slowly. Ah, he murmured. Now I understand. A few minutes later, Callum stepped to the microphone while conversations softened around the ballroom. He hated public speaking. Alara could tell instantly from the tension in his jaw. But his voice remained calm as he thanked donors and discussed expanding educational scholarships across New York. Then suddenly halfway through his speech, one projector screen behind him flickered unexpectedly. Headlines flashed across the ballroom. Callum Vale linked to secret acquisition deals. Billionaire under investigation. Murmurs immediately erupted through the room. Cameras lifted. Investors exchanged sharp looks. Callum remained perfectly still beneath the lights while hotel staff scrambled in panic near the control booth. Alara watched the room shift in real time. People who admired him 30 seconds earlier suddenly looked ready to abandon him publicly. Wealth moved fast. Loyalty moved faster in the opposite direction. Then she noticed something else. Callum was not angry. He looked tired. Deeply tired. Like a man too accustomed to betrayal to even react anymore. Without thinking, Alara stepped toward the stage. One reporter called loudly from the crowd. Mr. Vale, would you like to comment? Silence tightened across the ballroom. Callum looked out over the crowd slowly. Then his eyes found Alara standing near the front. And for the first time all evening, the tension in his face eased slightly just from seeing her there. The cruelest thing about public humiliation is how quickly strangers become experts on your life. Within minutes, phones appeared across the ballroom like tiny glowing weapons, while headlines already began spreading online. Callum Vale under investigation. Billionaire charity gala turns chaotic. Investors whispered behind champagne glasses. Socialites pretended concern while secretly enjoying every second of the drama. And through all of it, Callum remained standing beneath the chandelier lights with the same controlled expression that probably helped him survive rooms exactly like this for years. Alara watched him carefully from near the front of the stage. Most powerful men reacted to pressure by becoming louder, more defensive, more arrogant. Callum did the opposite. He became quieter. Mr. Vale, another reporter called sharply from the crowd. Is your company hiding offshore accounts? Murmurs spread again. The hotel staff still struggled to shut off the projector behind him, where financial accusations continued flashing across the giant screen. Callum finally stepped toward the microphone. No, he answered calmly. Then how do you explain the leaked reports? Before he could continue, a man near the back laughed loudly enough for the room to hear. Maybe because billionaires think rules are suggestions. Several people smiled awkwardly. Alara recognized the voice immediately. Mr. Kensington, the same man who humiliated her at the restaurant 2 nights earlier. Apparently, arrogance traveled well between locations. Callum's jaw tightened slightly, But before he could respond, Alara moved. She walked toward the stage in black heels that suddenly felt much steadier than before. 100 conversations faded as people turned toward her. Even Callum looked surprised. Alara stopped beside the microphone and glanced calmly toward Mr. Kensington. "That is interesting," she said lightly. "Because from what I have seen tonight, wealthy people do follow rules." Silence. Mostly the rule where everyone abandons someone the second bad news becomes inconvenient. A few nervous laughs escaped around the ballroom. Mr. Kensington frowned. "And who exactly are you?" Alara smiled politely. "The waitress, remember?" Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Callum watched her without blinking. "You know," Alara continued, "I spent years thinking rich people were different from everyone else. Smarter, more sophisticated. But honestly," she glanced around the ballroom slowly, "most of you are just adults with expensive shoes and unresolved anxiety." A woman near the bar snorted champagne through her nose, trying not to laugh. Even the string quartet stopped playing for a second. Mr. Kensington's face darkened. "This is hardly professional. Neither is attacking someone before facts exist." Alara turned toward the giant screen behind them. "Maybe the problem is not money. Maybe the problem is how quickly people enjoy watching someone fall." The ballroom became completely still, because suddenly she was not talking only about Callum anymore. She was talking about everyone in the room. Every betrayal. Every friendship based on status. Every polite smile hiding selfishness underneath. Callum stared at her with something dangerously close to admiration. Then finally, Evelyn appeared near the control booth holding a tablet. "The system was hacked," she announced loudly. "The reports are fake." Conversations exploded instantly. Investors who looked nervous 30 seconds earlier suddenly relaxed again, as if morality had returned now that stock prices were safe. Alara nearly laughed at the speed of human hypocrisy. Callum stepped down from the stage slowly while reporters redirected their attention elsewhere. The pressure in the room loosened, but he still looked exhausted beneath it all. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly once they reached a quieter hallway outside the ballroom. "I know. Then why did you?" Alara leaned against the marble wall and crossed her arms. "Because you looked like someone standing alone in a room full of people." Something shifted in his expression then. Small, fragile almost. Like nobody had ever defended him without wanting something in return. Before either of them could speak again, 2 photographers suddenly appeared near the hallway entrance. Flashbulbs exploded immediately. "Callum, who is she? Are you dating? Is this a publicity relationship?" Alara instinctively stepped backward from the cameras. The warmth of the evening vanished instantly. This was the real cost of proximity to powerful people. Attention. Endless attention. Callum immediately moved slightly in front of her, blocking most of the cameras. Without touching her. "That is enough," he said coldly. Security quickly intercepted the photographers, but the moment already lingered in the air afterward. Alara looked down at the marble floor. "This is your normal life?" "Unfortunately. People follow you into hallways? Sometimes elevators. That feels emotionally illegal." A faint smile appeared on his face again, but it faded quickly. "I should not have brought you here." Alara looked up immediately. "What? You did not ask for this attention." "Callum, I can make arrangements." Her stomach tightened unexpectedly at the word arrangements. "What kind of arrangements?" "I could send you somewhere quiet for a while. Miami. California. Somewhere the press will not bother you." She stared at him in disbelief. "Are you trying to protect me or relocate me?" "Alara. No, seriously. Because one sounds caring and the other sounds like witness protection for emotionally overwhelmed billionaires." He exhaled slowly. "I am trying to keep your life from becoming difficult because of me. You do not get to decide that alone." The hallway fell silent except for distant ballroom music drifting through the doors behind them. Callum looked at her carefully. "You deserve peace." Alara's eyes softened for one brief second before disappointment settled quietly underneath. "And you think peace means distance?" He did not answer. That hurt more than if he had. Some people break loudly. Others quietly disappear. Alara Quinn chose the second option. 3 days after the gala, she stopped answering unknown numbers. 2 days after that, she quit Marlowe House entirely. By the end of the week, even Sophia admitted the apartment felt different without her late-night sarcasm echoing through the kitchen. "You are really leaving?" Sophia asked while leaning against the bedroom doorway, watching Alara zip up an old Navy suitcase. Temporarily. That is emotionally suspicious wording. Alara smiled faintly without looking up. I just need air. In truth, she needed distance from feelings she could not organize properly. Callum Vale had entered her life like a storm wrapped in expensive tailoring. One moment, she had been balancing coffee trays and worrying about rent. The next, she was standing beside one of the most powerful men in America while cameras chased them through hotel hallways. And the worst part was not the attention. It was him. The quiet way he looked at her. The rare softness in his voice when he forgot to protect himself. The unbearable fact that underneath all the money and control, Callum seemed profoundly lonely. That was dangerous, because lonely people recognized each other too easily. You know he likes you, Sophia said carefully. Alara folded another sweater into the suitcase. He likes controlling situations. No, Sophia shook her head. Rich men control situations. That man looks at you like he accidentally found oxygen. Alara laughed softly despite herself. That is dramatic. I am dramatic because I rent in Brooklyn. It keeps the soul active. But later that afternoon, while riding a nearly empty train north along the Hudson River, Alara replayed every moment anyway. The way Callum stepped in front of cameras without hesitation. The way his voice changed whenever he said her name. The exhausted sadness hidden underneath his composure. Rain blurred against the train windows while Manhattan slowly disappeared behind her. 3 hours later, she arrived in Crescent Harbor, the small Connecticut coastal town where she grew up. The place smelled like salt water, old bookstores, and memories nobody fully escaped. Her father used to call it a town where everyone knows your business before breakfast. He had not been wrong. Alara Quinn, an older woman, gasped outside the grocery store 30 minutes after her arrival. Honey, I thought New York turned you glamorous. Alara looked down at her oversized sweatshirt. I forgot my tiara. That night, she sat alone inside the tiny house her father left behind after his death. Everything still looked the same. The faded blue walls. The old jazz records stacked near the shelf. The kitchen clock permanently 5 minutes fast because her father believed punctuality was a form of respect. She missed him suddenly with enough force to steal her breath. Alara wandered into the hallway and stopped beside the small wooden cabinet, where her father kept old documents and photographs. She opened it absent-mindedly, searching for nothing specific, then froze. Inside sat an old leather folder she had never noticed before. Her father's handwriting stretched across the front in faded ink. For Alara, only if it ever starts making sense. Well, that feels aggressively mysterious, she whispered to the empty room. She carried the folder to the kitchen table while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Inside were newspaper clippings, old financial articles, charity event invitations, photographs. Then her heartbeat stopped completely. One photo showed her father standing beside a much younger Callum Vale, and another man beside them. Same gray eyes, same sharp jawline. Callum's missing brother, Julian. Alara sat down slowly. The room suddenly felt too small. Beneath the photos rested a folded letter written in her father's careful handwriting. Alara opened it with trembling fingers. If you are reading this, then somehow the Vale family found their way back into your life. I always feared they would. Her chest tightened painfully. Years ago, before you were born, I worked with Richard Vale during the worst financial collapse his company ever faced. He was proud, brilliant, completely lost. But his sons were different, especially Julian. He reminded me that good men still existed inside powerful families. Alara kept reading, barely breathing now. The night before Julian disappeared, he came to see me. He was scared, said there were people around the company hiding dangerous things. He asked me to keep something safe if anything happened. Alara immediately looked toward the silver watch sitting on the kitchen table beside her. Suddenly the scratches, the strange tension in Callum's eyes, the familiar phrase. None of it felt random anymore. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the wood table hard enough to make her jump. Incoming call. Callum. She stared at his name glowing across the screen while thunder rolled softly over Crescent Harbor. Then slowly, after several rings, she answered. Neither of them spoke at first. Just silence. Breathing. Distance. Finally Callum's voice came quietly through. The phone. I went to the restaurant. Alara closed her eyes briefly. I know. Your manager said you left. I needed time. Another pause. Heavy this time. I miss talking to you, he admitted softly. The honesty in his voice hurt more than anger ever could. Alara looked down at the photograph of Callum and Julian sitting beneath her kitchen light. "Callum," she whispered carefully, "I think our lives were connected long before that restaurant." Silence exploded across the line. There are moments when a human life quietly changes direction forever. Not with explosions, not with speeches, just with one sentence spoken at exactly the right time. Callum Vale arrived in Crescent Harbor the next morning, just before sunrise. He had not slept. The drive from Manhattan stretched nearly 3 hours through rain and empty highways, while Evelyn spent most of the trip trying to convince him this entire situation sounded like the beginning of either a romance novel or a federal investigation. Possibly both, Callum admitted while staring out the window. Crescent Harbor looked nothing like his world. Small diners with hand-painted signs. Fishing boats rocking quietly near the docks. Old brick storefronts still decorated for holidays weeks after everyone else moved on. The town carried the strange warmth of places where people still recognized each other in grocery stores. Callum stepped out near the waterfront as cold ocean wind swept through his coat. For a moment, he simply stood there listening to gulls cry above gray water. 11 years ago, Julian had disappeared somewhere inside the machinery of New York wealth and power. And now somehow the trail had led here. To a waitress with tired eyes and a sarcastic mouth who made silence feel less lonely. Alara opened the front door before he could knock. She wore an oversized cream sweater and looked like she had not slept either. Neither of them spoke immediately. Callum's eyes drifted toward the folder in her hands. "You found something." Alara nodded slowly and stepped aside. "You should come in." The house smelled faintly like coffee and cedarwood. Warm. Lived in. Nothing like the cold perfection of Callum's penthouse. Overlooking Central Park, he noticed photographs along the hallway. Alara as a little girl beside a tall, smiling man with rough hands and kind eyes. Her father. "He built boats," she said quietly after noticing Callum looking. "Mostly fishing boats. Sometimes he fixed engines for people who could not afford new ones." Callum nodded once. Julian would have liked him. The honesty of that statement settled gently between them. Alara led him into the kitchen where old papers covered the table beneath soft morning light. Callum immediately froze when he saw the photographs. Julian smiling beside Alara's father 20 years earlier. Younger. Alive. Happy in a way Callum barely remembered anymore. He sat down slowly, as if the chair suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "Where did you get these?" "My father kept them hidden." Alara handed him the letter carefully. Callum read every line in complete silence while rain tapped softly against the windows. The deeper he read, the tighter his jaw became. Julian had suspected corruption inside Vale Capital years before his disappearance. Hidden financial manipulation. Investors connected to criminal laundering. Powerful people protected by wealth and fear. "My God," Callum whispered finally. Alara watched him carefully across the kitchen table. "Do you think your brother disappeared because of this?" He looked down at the old photograph again. "I think Julian was trying to expose someone dangerous." Silence filled the kitchen afterward. Heavy. Grieving. But underneath it all was another realization neither of them could ignore anymore. Their lives had crossed long before Manhattan. Long before the restaurant. Long before that first impossible night. "There is something else," Alara said quietly. She reached into the kitchen drawer and placed the silver watch onto the table between them. Callum stared at it instantly. "That belonged to Julian. My father kept it after your brother disappeared." Callum picked up the watch with trembling fingers. Time itself suddenly felt fragile in his hands. "He gave it to my father for safekeeping," Alara explained softly. "According to the letter, Julian said if anything happened to him, someone trustworthy needed to protect the evidence." Callum looked up slowly. "And your father never told anyone. He was protecting your family." Outside, the rain finally began easing over Crescent Harbor while pale sunlight pushed softly through the clouds. For the first time in years, Callum felt closer to his brother instead of farther away. And somehow the person guiding him there was not a detective or lawyer or executive. It was a waitress from Brooklyn who accidentally spilled water on the wrong man one rainy night. The absurdity of life almost made him laugh. Alara noticed the expression immediately. "What? Nothing. That face means something." Callum leaned back slightly, still holding the watch. "I was just thinking Julian would have loved you." Alara blinked once. "That might be the strangest compliment anyone has ever given me." He liked honest people. Then he would have hated Manhattan. A quiet laugh escaped Callum before he could stop it. Real this time. Unguarded. Alara smiled watching him, and suddenly the room felt warmer than before. Safer somehow. Then Callum's expression softened again as he looked at her across the kitchen table. I owe you an apology. For what? For trying to send you away. Alara lowered her eyes briefly. You were trying to protect me. No, he shook his head gently. I was trying to control the situation because I was afraid. She looked surprised by the confession. Afraid of what? Callum held her gaze steadily now. No billionaire mask. No emotional distance. Just honesty. Afraid that if you stayed close to me, I would start needing you there. The room became completely still. Somewhere outside, a church bell rang softly through the coastal town. Alara looked down for 1 second before smiling faintly. That is inconvenient, she whispered. Why? Her eyes lifted back toward his. Warm now. Vulnerable in a way she had never allowed before. Because I think I already started needing you too. 1 year later, Manhattan still moved too fast for most people to notice miracles. Yellow taxis still flooded wet streets after midnight. Coffee shops still overflowed with exhausted interns and overconfident finance bros pretending 4 hours of sleep counted as ambition. And somewhere high above Park Avenue, Callum Vale stood near the glass windows of his office watching snow fall slowly between skyscrapers while reporters prepared downstairs for the largest press conference of the year. You are smiling again, Evelyn observed from the doorway while holding a folder. It is deeply unsettling. Callum glanced toward her calmly. You should document it for science. I already did. The board thinks you joined a wellness cult. He laughed quietly under his breath. That still surprised people. A year earlier, Callum had survived on strategy, silence, and emotional isolation disguised as professionalism. Now there was warmth in him again, not because life became easier. In fact, the investigation surrounding Julian's disappearance had shaken half the financial world over the previous 12 months. Hidden corruption inside multiple firms had finally been exposed using the evidence Julian protected all those years ago. Several executives resigned publicly. Others disappeared from headlines overnight. But through all of it, Callum changed in quieter ways. He worked less at midnight, ate actual meals, sometimes even ignored emails after 10 p.m., which nearly caused several junior executives to experience spiritual confusion. Most importantly, he stopped living like loneliness was part of his identity. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. The reporters are asking if Miss Quinn will attend today. Callum's expression softened instantly at the name. She is late. That woman made a billionaire comfortable with uncertainty. Honestly impressive. Before he could answer, the office doors opened behind them. Alara Quinn stepped inside, carrying 2 coffee cups and snowflakes melting softly in her blonde hair. Sorry, she announced. A man in the lobby tried explaining cryptocurrency to me, and I briefly considered moving to Canada. Evelyn pointed toward her dramatically. See? This is why you look emotionally hydrated now. Alara handed Callum one of the coffees. What does emotionally hydrated mean? Apparently it means I smile now. Terrifying, Alara whispered. Callum shook his head quietly while taking the coffee from her hands. Even after a year, some moments still felt strangely unreal to him. The waitress from Brooklyn now stood inside his office wearing a long winter coat and teasing him like she belonged there. Because she did. Not because of money. Not because of status. But because she was the first person in years who saw the man underneath the billionaire before she ever cared about the billionaire himself. Alara moved toward the giant windows overlooking Manhattan. You know, she said softly, for a city with 8 million people, this place is weirdly lonely sometimes. Callum stepped beside her. Less now. Her eyes lifted toward his, and that familiar warmth passed silently between them again. Slow. Steady. Real. Downstairs, reporters gathered near the stage while cameras flashed through the lobby. The official press conference would announce the creation of the Julian Vale Foundation, a national scholarship program supporting students from working-class families entering investigative journalism and financial ethics programs. Julian spent his life trying to expose the truth. Callum intended to make sure that truth mattered. 30 minutes later, the press conference began. Questions flooded the room immediately. Business. Scandals. Recovery. Future investments. Callum answered each calmly beside the foundation announcement banner while Alara watched quietly from the side of the stage. Then one reporter raised a hand near the front row. Mr. Vale, she asked, over the past year your public image has changed dramatically. People say you seem happier, more human, honestly. Soft laughter moved through the room. Was there a specific turning point? Callum looked toward Alara immediately. No hesitation. No performance. Just truth. Cameras turned toward her instantly. Alara nearly rolled her eyes on instinct. You know, Callum said slowly. People assume success changes your life. He glanced down briefly before continuing. It does not. It only changes your address. The room fell quiet. The real changes usually come from people. His eyes never left Alara's. And sometimes the right person walks into your life when you least expect it, usually carrying coffee and judging your emotional decisions. Reporters laughed softly. Alara shook her head, smiling despite herself. Then one journalist asked the obvious question. So who is she to you? Callum looked at Alara for one long second. The same way he looked at her that first impossible night in the restaurant. Like he recognized something important before he understood why. Then finally he answered quietly, honestly, without hiding from it anymore. Home. Silence settled gently across the room afterward. Not awkward silence. The kind people respected. Later that night, long after reporters left and Manhattan disappeared beneath falling snow, Callum and Alara stood alone on the rooftop terrace outside his penthouse wrapped in winter coats and city light. The skyline glowed around them endlessly. You know, Alara murmured while leaning against the railing. A year ago, I was arguing with customers about side salads. And now, she smiled softly toward him. Now I yell at billionaires recreationally. You are very gifted at it. She laughed quietly before the cold wind carried the sound into the night. Then Callum reached for her hand. Simple, gentle, certain. Thank you, he said. Alara looked up. For what? Snow drifted slowly between them while the city hummed below. For staying. Her expression softened immediately. You stayed too. Callum touched his forehead lightly against hers beneath the Manhattan skyline. No cameras. No reporters. No performance left. Just two people who found each other at the exact moment they needed to. And somewhere far beyond the city noise, beyond wealth and loneliness and all the strange accidents that brought them together, life finally became something neither of them had to survive alone. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from, and subscribe to When He Chose He channel. Every like helps us bring more emotional stories of unexpected connections, quiet courage, and life-changing moments to viewers around the world. Share this video with someone who believes that kindness, dignity, and love can appear when we least expect them. Subscribe and join our growing community for more unforgettable stories that remind us never to judge a person by what we see on the surface.